Joining us now, former Assistant Manhattan District Attorney Catherine Christian. Also with us, MSNBC political analyst Brendan Buck and New York Magazine freelance writer Andrew Rice, who very extensively covered the New York trial. Thanks to all of you for being here. Can I ask you a big picture question, Catherine, first, and then I'll get into some of the details of what we saw today. But that is this an unprecedented test for our criminal justice system, how it operates, whether or not, as we certainly have heard from Judge Juan Merchan, it operates apart from politics, apart from how much money you have?
Yes, it is. And it would be accurate to say that now President-elect Donald Trump was treated differently than other defendants with his four different indictments. But now here we are. He's President-elect Trump. Because he wasn't sentenced in September, we are now left with this conundrum. And it's not surprising that the Manhattan DA would say they're opposing the motion to dismiss. I am surprised that they basically are consenting to a delay to 2029, which actually under New York law, you're supposed to be sentenced without unreasonable delay, except for very specific circumstances, like you're in a treatment program. So, yes, it is.
Well, I mean, I just want to stop you there. I don't think whoever wrote that could foresee this kind of eventuality, right?
Yes, it's, this is unprecedented. When has a former president, now president-elect, been convicted by a jury? And then now here we are is because he's a president-elect, we're now saying, well, clearly he can't be sentenced because he's about to become president. It's something that, this is history.
Yeah, and so let's talk about the filing, the specifics of the filing from DA Alvin Bragg and the decision that is now facing Judge Juan Merchan. What will he weigh from a legal standpoint? And what about the politics of it? Do you think that he can be counted on to put that aside and makes a judgment on the law, understanding that this is unprecedented? Catherine.
Oh, I thought you were talking to Mr. Buck. Sorry. I think Judge Merchan, from what he has shown, will probably agree with the Manhattan DA that, this has to be delayed, meaning the sentence. He clearly may not dismiss the indictment. First of all, if Judge Merchan dismisses the indictment, case is over, there's no sentencing, move on. The problem with the delay in sentencing, when you're a criminal defendant, there is no judgment of conviction until you have actually been sentenced. What that means is you don't have a criminal record. Donald Trump does not have a criminal record because he has not been sentenced. If a defendant were to pass away before he's been sentenced, it's like the case never happened. The case goes away. So justice delayed is justice denied, particularly in this case. If he's not sentenced, it's just a case that's hanging out there. And he can't, quite frankly, he can't appeal it if he's not sentenced. You can't appeal a case until there's a judgment. So it just will be there until after he's done his presidency.
Andrew.
And 4 years is a long time.
Yeah. So, Andrew, look, we saw a group of New Yorkers put their life on hold to be part of this trial week after week after week. You watched it very closely with a reporter's eye. So I asked you to put a reporter's eye on this moment, where we are and how we got here.
Well, I mean, I think that the DA's office actually sort of laid out the conflicting imperatives here. Well, on the one hand, you've got the presidential immunity decision, which is unprecedented. There's an unprecedented situation and a new Supreme Court doctrine. On the other hand, you have the age-old principle that a jury conviction, if properly come to, should stand. And so therefore Judge Merchan has a lot to weigh. And one of the things he was very cognizant of during the trial, I felt, was the imposition on the time and on the privacy, frankly, of these jurors braving potential threats to themselves, giving up weeks and weeks of their lives to come to a verdict. And I think that we're going to see potentially a quite thoughtful weighing of that sacrifice and what it deserves.
Well, you make a really important point because, again, you were there and you remind us of what they faced and the pressure, clearly, that they were under. Even before today, for New York Magazine, Andrew, you put it pretty simply as Trump beat the system by turning the election into a referendum on his own freedom. So I think, is it a legitimate question by that standard? Are the American people the new criminal and civil jury?
Well, I mean, you could say that there's a greater kind of political logic to it, right? That he won the election, so there's been a verdict of 270 electoral votes, or 270 plus. On the other hand, that's not how the criminal code of the United States is written. There's no get out of jail free card if you win an election written into the system. So therefore, we're talking about writing new rules. And we have to think about, I think this judge and ultimately probably the Supreme Court going to have to think about whether it creates perverse incentives to create a principle that that your legal liability is expunged if you happen to win an election to the presidency.
What do you think, Brendan? Should a greater political logic apply when we're talking about a jury verdict?
Well, it certainly seems like they're allowing the fact that he won dictate the law here, and that's sort of remarkable. I mean, I don't even know that they're citing the immunity ruling. They're just simply saying because he's going to be president, he can't be sentenced. So I think that's very notable. Look, the politics of this seem to be non-existent. I mean, it's an interesting counterfactual. Democrats largely ignored this hearing this trial while it was going on, and only talked about it a little bit after the fact. I don't know that would have made a difference, but I don't think this election really had much of anything to do with Donald Trump's trials and convictions and all the other things they had going on. That's not what people were voting on. But you can look at this now in the bigger picture and say, this is why Donald Trump probably feels invincible right now. There is very little accountability for much of anything that he does. And I think that speaks to the way that he's carrying out his transition. He doesn't feel like anything hems him in. One of the guardrails of politicians is public opinion. And what happens if people just don't care? No one seemed to care about this. This didn't seem to have an impact in how anyone was voting. And so now you can get away with just about anything, and you can start, appointing people like Matt Gaetz as Attorney General because you don't seem like you ever face any accountability for anything.
Well, let me ask you this then, Brendan. If voters, and again, this is arguable, right? If they sent a message, or at least it seems that Trump's convictions and pending indictments were not viewed as disqualifying by 50% of the voters, do you think that translates more broadly into where we are as an electorate? Or is it only about the unique political being that is Donald Trump?
I mean, I do think some of it is just Donald Trump. I don't know how many other people could be convicted of something and just get away with it. He is so numbed everybody and broken our sense of outrage and what should bother people that it's just hard for anybody to pay attention to it. I don't think that transfers to anybody else. But look, we're here and now with him. And so it does matter quite a bit that he can do the outrageous. He can have the outrageous happen to him. And people just simply don't care about that kind of thing. They are much more interested in what he's going to do for them or how he makes them feel or what he says he's going to do for them in office. And I think that is relatively dangerous for our country, that we just are so tuned out to things like this that I can't sit here and tell you that it has any real meaningful political impact.
So then, Catherine, I do want to touch on what we saw in Georgia today, a single line, but essentially what it means is that this hearing on what Donald Trump wanted to do, which was disqualify the DA, Fani Willis, because of these allegations about her involvement with the special prosecutor in the case. He wanted her off the case. I mean, what is the real world impact of that? And what does it mean for his co-defendants in Georgia, for example?
Well, it's interesting because the Georgia Court of Appeals didn't give a reason. They just said, we're not going to have this scheduled oral argument on December 5th. Now, you made a good point. There are still 14 defendants left in that case, and clearly they can't argue immunity. And this issue, this case fell into the black hole, quite frankly, a long time ago, because the appeal is basically about whether or not the DA should be removed from the case. It has nothing to do with really the substance of the case. So I don't foresee this case ever going to trial, at least against Donald Trump, President-elect Trump.